an untold chapter of the Qing court. Imagine stepping into the silent corridors of the Forbidden City at night. The moonlight spills over golden roof tiles, casting long shadows between vermilion walls. Somewhere deep within the palace grounds, a faint rustle echoes. Not from a servant's hurried footsteps, but from something unseen. The Qing dynasty's court was a place of rigid ceremony and strict hierarchy, where every action followed a code as precise as the strokes of imperial calligraphy. But behind this carefully painted facade, there were whispers of another world, one hidden in the shadows, beyond the reach of imperial law, the Underworld. Among those who knew these secrets best were the palace eunuchs. These men, servants without families, stripped of worldly inheritance, often found themselves in a precarious position. They held power in proximity to the emperor, yet lived in constant fear of disgrace, poverty, and a lonely death. And so some turned to a different form of negotiation, contracts not with the living, but with spirits. These agreements, whispered in the darkness, promised protection, wealth, and even influence, in exchange for obedience to forces beyond the mortal realm. Tonight, we peel back the layers of palace life to reveal the eerie, often forbidden rituals of yin-yang dealings, pacts made between human and ghost, court servant and netherworld emissary. Section 1. The Eunuch's World. To understand why such pacts emerged, we need to understand the unique place eunuchs held in Chinese imperial society. Eunuchs were men who had undergone castration, a physical and symbolic act that removed them from the lineage-based social order of Confucian China. In a culture where one's duty to continue the family line was paramount, eunuchs were social anomalies. They served inside the palace, closer to the emperor and his household than any other official. They guarded the inner court, managed the daily needs of the royal family, and sometimes acted as political agents. In the Qing dynasty, the Grand Eunuch could rival the influence of ministers. Yet all eunuchs lived at the mercy of imperial favor. Without sons to care for them in old age, many eunuchs feared dying alone. Traditional Chinese belief held that a person's soul required proper ancestral rites to find peace in the afterlife. But for eunuchs, there was no ancestral hall, no descendants to burn incense, no family tomb to return to. This spiritual void made them particularly vulnerable, and perhaps more willing to seek bonds with the supernatural. In Qing palace gossip, it was said some eunuchs kept small shrines hidden behind their quarters, honoring not the gods of Confucian orthodoxy, but local spirits, wandering ghosts or underworld deities. These were beings who could be bargained with, if one was bold enough to pay the price. Section 2. The Underworld in Chinese Thought. To a Western ear, the underworld may conjure images of the Greek Hades or the Christian Hell. But in traditional Chinese cosmology, the Diyu, the realm of the dead, was more like a vast bureaucratic empire than a pit of eternal fire. The Chinese underworld mirrored the imperial court itself. It had judges, scribes, prisons, and heavenly officials. Souls passed through its courts to face judgment for their deeds in life. Punishments were meted out not as eternal damnation, but as corrective measures before the soul's next reincarnation. Deities like Yanluo Wang, the king of hell, presided over these realms. His officials, from Oxhead and Horseface to the black and white impermanence, were said to roam the mortal world, collecting the souls of the dead. In this system, deals could be made. Just as one might bribe a palace clerk to smooth a request before it reached the emperor, one might persuade an underworld emissary to alter the course of fate. Eunuchs, well versed in the ways of bureaucracy, would have immediately understood the idea of spiritual networking. The same skills they used to navigate the politics of the living could, in theory, be applied to dealings with the dead. Section 3. The Pact Rituals. So how exactly did a eunuch make a contract with a spirit? The historical record is scarce. Unsurprising, given the secrecy and potential punishment if discovered. But fragments survive in folk accounts, court rumors, and later writings by Qing historians. One method was known as offering the shadow, yin-yang. In this ritual, the eunuch would burn incense at midnight in a quiet, unlit room. Before him, he would place a paper effigy representing himself alongside offerings of wine, meat, and paper money. The key moment came when he pricked his finger and let a drop of blood fall onto the paper figure's forehead. This symbolically linked his shadow self to the spirit being invoked. The contract might promise protection from rivals in the palace, a wealth in the form of lucky gambling, bribes, or imperial rewards, a proper burial and afterlife rites, arranged by the spirit's influence after death. But in return, the eunuch pledged service, perhaps delivering regular offerings, carrying out small errands for the spirit in the living world, or even guiding other souls toward its domain. Another, more dangerous ritual involved visiting the lonely spirit festivals during Ghost Month. Eunuchs would slip out in disguise, mingling with commoners at makeshift roadside altars. They sought out wandering ghosts, especially those of other eunuchs or palace servants, and offered companionship, binding them with vows of mutual protection. Section 4. Forbidden Knowledge. The Qing Imperial Code explicitly forbade contact with mediums, sorcerers, or unregistered temples without permission. Any palace servant caught engaging in yin-yang practices risked flogging, exile, or worse. Yet these prohibitions only made such dealings more enticing to those desperate for security. A late Qing diary from a court clerk mentions an incident where a eunuch was discovered with a red contract, a talisman written in cinnabar ink, signed with both his name and that of an underworld official. The eunuch was dismissed quietly, likely to avoid scandal. These pacts were never officially acknowledged, but whispers persisted, especially after sudden shifts in palace fortunes. When a low-ranked eunuch unexpectedly rose to a position of influence, or when a cruel overseer fell mysteriously ill, tongues wagged. Had a contract been made? Section 5. Western Encounters. When Western diplomats and missionaries entered the Qing court in the 19th century, they were largely unaware of these hidden spiritual dealings. But some recorded strange incidents: objects vanishing from secure chambers, servants avoiding certain corridors at night, inexplicable illness striking specific individuals. In missionary letters, there are veiled references to heathen superstitions involving ghost intermediaries. One Jesuit astronomer in Beijing wrote of eunuchs who believe they possess contracts binding not men, but the dead. He dismissed them as delusions, yet could not explain the precise accuracy with which some eunuchs predicted deaths in the imperial household. Conclusion. The story of eunuchs and their underworld contracts is more than just a tale of superstition. It is a reflection of life inside a system where power was vast but precarious, where survival often depended on invisible alliances. For eunuchs who had given up the possibility of family and lineage, these pacts offered a kind of cosmic insurance policy. They could not rely on sons to care for their graves, but perhaps an underworld ally could ensure their name did not vanish entirely. In a way, these deals with the underworld were not so different from the political bargains made in the light of day. Both involved negotiation, reciprocity, and the careful balancing of power. And so, the Forbidden City was never just the Emperor's palace. It was also, in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, a place where two courts overlapped, the court of the living and the court of the dead. Even now, some Beijing locals will tell you, if you walk the palace grounds at night, listen closely. You may hear whispers, not in the dialects of the living, but in the low, urgent tones of a servant speaking to someone who is no longer there.